والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المقتولين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من يوم عداوتهم إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد، قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في محكم الكتاب المجيد: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. هل أتى على الإنسان حين من الدهر لم يكن شيئا مذكورا. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Insan asks us a very profound question which requires us to ponder and think about the answer to this question, which is: has there come to mankind a time when he was nothing worthy of being mentioned? That has there come a time to a human being when he was nothing? That do we have a right to think that we always existed? Do we have a right to think that we as human beings have always been here? This is what God is saying. He's asking us to ponder over our origins. Right? Remember the Inna Lillahi wa Inna Ilayhi Raji'un. That the first part of that phrase, Allah is asking us to ponder over this. Meaning Allah is asking us to ask ourselves, what does all of this mean? Abu Abdullah al-Hussein ibn Ali in the Arafah, when he came out of his tent on the plains of Arafah and lifted his hands to the sky, he said, ابتدأتني بنعمتك قبل أن أكون شيئا مذكورا. Right? As he says in this beautiful dua, imagine, completely through improv. Right? It's not like he prepared it in his tent, memorized it, and then he came out and he began. No. In complete impromptu fashion, he comes out of his tent, he raises his hands and he says that you began me, you initiated me by your blessing before I was anything worthy of being mentioned. Meaning I only existed in your knowledge. وَخَلَقْتَنِي مِنَ الْتُرَابِ, and you created me from dust. ثُمَّ أَسْكَنْتَنِي الْأَسْلَابِ آمِنًا لِرَيْبِ الْمُنُونَ, and then you put me in to the genetic makeup. That you created me in such a way that I was an embryo in potentia waiting to come into this world. Right? In the DNA of my fathers, in the loins of my fathers, protected. آمِنًا لِرَيْبِ الْمَنُونَ وَإِخْتِلَافِ الدُّهُورِ, protected from the vicissitudes of time. What's my point here? That this incredible dua begins in the most marvelous way, forcing human beings to think about where they have come from and how they have arrived at where they have arrived at. Why are we here? Why was I born at this time, to this father, to this mother, on this date, not another day, at this time, at night, not in the morning? Why? Each and every aspect of this formula in equation has the fingerprint of God. That's what the Imam is saying here. But we live in a world in which these questions are lost upon people. We live in a world in which people are thirsty for spiritual meaning like this. Because the universe has become disenchanted. The universe has been robbed and ripped of its sacrality and its sacredness. Human life and existence has been robbed of its sacredness, has been robbed of its meaning. And I'm not the only one to say this. People like Thomas Merton, Charles Taylor, David Bentley Hart, many great scholars, Christians and non-Christians, have written about this for decades and ages. That the world has become disenchanted And because of the disenchantment of this world, because of the usurpation of any sense of sacrality and the sacred being robbed from existence, because of this, our politics suffer, our families suffer, and ourselves suffer. And a derivative of the evacuation of the sacred from existence is the crisis of individualism. Is that each and every human being is told that you are an individual first, and your rights as an individual come first. And what you feel to be true is true. What you feel to be right is right. That it is your ra'i and your opinion and your hawa which determines everything that you want. Me, myself, and I. Right? Or as the Nike saying goes, just do it. Who cares? Because the universe has been robbed of its sacrality. Human life has been robbed of its sacrality. So we are left on our own, thirsty and impoverished for spiritual meaning. And this has had disastrous effects. Not only on civil society and democratic institutions. Of course, we know that voting is down, all kinds of things. That it's not only adversely affected the various political institutions. I'm not interested so much in that, but it has shattered the family and the self. Questions such as, does God exist? And so what now? Are lost. But it is only through answering these questions, which is, does God exist? And if so, what do we do about it? What does it mean to me if it is true that God exists? Why is that important? And it is through answering these two questions that we can appreciate the call of Imam al-Hussein. هل من ناصر ينصرنا هل من مغيث يغيثنا. The entire mission of Imam al-Hussein is the answer to the confirmation that there is a God. It is the answer to the verse, يا أيها الذين آمنوا استجيبوا لله وللرسول إذا دعاكم لما يحييكم. It is the answer to God's call to humanity to answer the call of God and the messenger so that they may be brought back to life. That once we believe that God exists, now we must answer his call. That belief comes with responsibility. That you can't just say, I believe and that's it and nothing else. Belief must be followed and precipitated with answering the call of God and the prophets. Belief on its own is not sufficient in any religious tradition. There is no religious tradition which states that belief on its own is sufficient. Except until now in this modern society, isn't it? It's only now, perhaps in the last 50 years, that belief on its own is sufficient. That it's enough that I can have a PhD in Islamic law, in philosophy, in engineering, whatever. But I could have no life of worship, no sense of God, no piety, no akhlaq, nothing, none of that matters. But I can sit and tell you about 5 million things about Islamic law, and Islamic history, and Islamic logic. But there's a radical disconnect in the world in which we live between belief and practice. And somehow it's become okay to believe something and not implement it. But it's not okay. It's a disaster. Right? Hypocrisy has become acceptable. Why? Because of individualism. Because the individual has become God. Right? Or in the words of Nietzsche, God is dead. right? The European philosopher who said God is dead and we have cut him with our swords. He's a European philosopher. He says, now, what purification can we develop in order to wash ourselves of this crime? What holidays can we construct in order to wash ourselves of this murder? This is not my words. This is a word of a European philosopher who lived in the last century. So because of all of this, people think that I can be smart but not live a life of worship. Religious tradition teaches us whatever religion you follow. Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, Zoroastrianism, that this is the absolute most disparaging, ignorant, and backwards mentality. To think that I can believe in something, read about something, be educated, but not live a life of worship. To disconnect the two is to lose your humanity from the perspective of religious tradition. Of any religious tradition. Any. This is a universal belief. But it is only until now that somehow, with the audacity of modern man or modern woman, that it's okay to be a hypocrite. As I say, I'm going to hell anyways. Isn't that what they say? I mean, we have to read so carefully into the dialogue of, especially of the media, right? Oh, I'm going to hell anyways, right? This kind of concept of absolute disregard for becoming a faithful person. Sallu ala Muhammad wa alihi.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Yet those who ask the meaning of human life, must be religious. Einstein said himself, what is the meaning of human life? It means to be religious. That the one who looks for meaning in their life should be religious. Einstein said this. Wittgenstein has said, to believe in God means to see that the facts of the world are not the end of the matter. To believe in God means to see that life has a meaning. There are two things at work here which I want to explain. Einstein has said it, Wittgenstein, these famous scholars have said it. Science explains, or rather, science tells us what it observes. It observes certain observable phenomena, and it dictates it in the form of statistics, and tells us. It doesn't tell us what it means. That's exactly what Einstein is saying. That if you're looking for meaning, then you need religion. Science will not give you meaning. Science will give you data. Science will not tell you why that data is. What is the importance, the significance of that data? What does that data mean, ultimately mean? What is the ultimate existential meaning of that data? Science will not give us that answer. Einstein made this clear in the 40s and the 30s. It is religion that gives us that answer. It is revelation that gives us that answer. It is the life of the prophets and the saints that give us that answer. Not science. And nobody ever pretended to say that science does give that answer. Not Einstein and not others. They never pretended that science has an answer to each and every question. It would be very audacious and arrogant for them to say so. It is only until now, out of the intense, composite, compound ignorance and arrogance and self-aggrandizement of human beings, that they think that they don't need religion. This is the musibah of our time. This is the tragedy of our time. People talk about Einstein so much. Have you ever talked about what Einstein has said about religion? No. That's interesting. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
The formation of the universe involves such astronomical improbabilities that had one single mathematical constant been different by even like 1/1000th of a degree, there would be no life. This is known as a cosmological argument for God's existence. I won't go through everything. But the fact is that none of this is an accident. The fact that we are here at a certain time, at a certain place, born at night, not born during the day, born on a Friday, not born on a Thursday, is not a random incident. That's what God is telling us in the Quran. This is what Imam al-Hussein is telling us in Dua Arafah. None of this is an accident. That all of this has the fingerprint of God. That even before I was born, even before my parents conceived me, I already existed in the ilm of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we read these du'as in Quran, do we do tadabbur? To think, what are we reading? What is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asking from us? And what is our current condition and situation today? Take that, I don't need to fill in the blanks. Each and every one of us can think. Where do we stand? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
The grammar of faith, or the syntax of faith, is expressed through poetry, prose, and worship. That every single religious tradition, I like to talk about universalism sometimes, because in this society people say, oh, you're only talking about Islam. We're in this whole kind of universal society these days, right? Where everything has to be found everywhere. And this is, every single faith tells us what? That the expression of your faith is through worship. There's no such thing as being faithful and not engaging in worship. There's just no such thing. It's like saying that I want to be human, but I'm not going to drink water. I want to live, but I'm not going to drink water. For any faith, the basic premise of the Abrahamic tradition is that with faith comes worship. That faith needs to be expressed. It is not enough that it is believed. It has never been sufficient for anyone at any period in human history that it is enough to say that I believe. No saint, no prophet, no scholar of value in Judaism, Christianity, or Islam has ever said that just say that you believe. Or we believe, amanna. It's not kafi, it's not enough. That faith must come to life through worship. That worship and liturgy and prayer form the primary experience of God for the faithful. That is the primary experience. The most intimate and primary experience of the faithful. It always has been until now. Where you could read 1 million books on Islam, have 10 PhDs, and never pray. I know people like that. Who've written hundreds of books. Or hundreds of articles and dozens of books. On detailed issues of the Arabic language, of usul al-fiqh, of fiqh, kalam, falsafa, theology, philosophy. And they don't pray. But they got PhD after their name. In reality, any religious tradition would say that this man is jahil, because that belief has not been expressed. And only a jahil, ignorant person would bother studying and learning and have it all rust and rot away without expressing it through a life of worship and devotion. Sallu ala Muhammad wa alayhi.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa alayhi Muhammad.
And that's why God tells us time and time again, فَاعْتَبِرُوا يَا أُولِي الْأَبْصَارِ. Why? In Surah Hashr. That ponder, oh the people of perception. Ponder, think about it. This verse was revealed with regards to the Jews of Banu Nadir. I won't go into too much detail here, except for the fact that it discusses God's divine help of the Prophet, showing how the Prophet was successful with God's help at every step of the way. Showing that despite Banu Nadir plotting to assassinate the Prophet, God informed the Prophet, and the Prophet set into motion certain plans which not only would prevent his assassination, but would also bring about the end of Banu Nadir. Right? And they would run from there to Khaybar, for those who study the seerah of the Prophet. And if we don't know this, then we are missing out in the basics of our Islam. This is an ayah from the Quran and an extremely important life in the extremely important event in the life of the Holy Prophet. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informs the Prophet that the Banu Nadir are plotting to kill him. Rasulullah implements a brilliant strategy. This includes for the first time and the only time cutting the palm trees in order to have them run out of their homes. And then Allah says, فَأَطَاهُمْ اللَّهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَمْ يَحْتَسِبُوا وَقَذَفَ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ الرُّعْبَ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala came upon them from a place that they didn't know, and He struck fear into their hearts. يُخْرِبُونَ بُيُوتَهُمْ بِأَيْدِيهِمْ وَأَيْدِي الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. And they ended up destroying their own houses and with their own hands and the hands of the believers. That they thought that the Prophet could do nothing. They thought he was powerless. That they had him cold. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying something else. Then He says, فَاعْتَبِرُوا يَا أُولِي الْأَبْصَارِ. That all the people of insight think about what has happened. Meaning what? Meaning I don't need to give you a bucket list. That if you are people of thinking, you can look at the life of the Prophet, study how things happen, and reach certain conclusions. 1, regarding his prophethood. 2, regarding his asma. And 3, regarding the divine message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That God doesn't need to write it in bullet point form on a PowerPoint presentation. That the Imam doesn't need to put it on a PowerPoint presentation and spoon feed it to us. Because we are people of insight, of perception. We have the ability to listen to something and take a lesson from it. This is an important attribute of the believers. And if the believer is unable to do this, then they have some deficiency. So what does اعتبروا really mean? It means مأخوذة من العبور أي العبور من شيء إلى شيء. Meaning to take something to something else. That when you hear something from the Quran or from the Sunnah or from the Seerah, you're able to take that and apply it to something else. You don't necessarily need to be told and apply it here, here, and here. Because we are people of insight. This is what Allah is telling us. That we're able to understand. We're able to read the Quran and not necessarily require every time a kind of bullet point practical advice, 5-point bucket list to take home. Because we have insight. We have an ability to understand. That we don't need to be spoon-fed basic facts. And of course, again, the problem is with our society. Right? Let's look at presidential debates. They used to be held at a grade 11 to grade 12 English level. Now, according to the speechwriters that I was looking at, they write the answers at a grade 5 level. Why? Why do they write and organize the language in presidential debates and presidential speeches at a grade 5 level? Because people can't think. Their minds are just stuffed with nonsense and garbage. Thus, they need bucket lists. They need to be spoon-fed everything in this. Because it's a society of consumption. I want it and I want it now. I don't want to work for it. Don't make me think. Just give me what I need and I want to go home. I just want to pass by the drive-thru and pick up my admonitions and lessons of deen from in that way. But this is entirely antithetical to the message of the Quran and the Sunnah. Entirely antithetical. Entirely opposite. We are not a society of, 5-point people. And that's it. We're able to derive understanding from things. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
And another meaning for tears is abra, isn't it? What a coincidence. How is it a coincidence that the word to ponder or to take a lesson is the same word for tears, for crying? Why? Why is there a connection? Stay with me here. I want you to think. We're not here just to jam information down your throat. That the word for tears in Arabic, there are many words for it. It's the same word which means admonition, understanding, lesson. Ibra. Why? Because when we cry, if our tears are true, they are tears of reflection. They are tears of pondering. They are tears in which our heart is shattered at the musibah of Ahlul Bayt. And we don't cry out of a sense of cultural norm. We cry because our soul is crying. Our soul is hurt. It's burning. It's on fire. Our heart is on fire. Right? As Ahlul Bayt say in their, as Imam Sadiq alayhi salam says in his tradition. وارحم وارحم تلك القلوب التي احترقت لنا. That have mercy on those hearts which are on fire for us. That this is the kind of tears that Ahlul Bayt is looking for. This is the kind of tears that Ahlul Bayt appreciates. Tears of reflection. Tears where I cry because I know why I'm crying. That when I listen to a poem, I cry because I am doing فَاعْتَبِرُوا يَا أُولِي الْأَبْصَارِ. That I'm implementing this verse. That I'm taking a lesson from this poetry. I'm not just sitting and just coming and going. So we have to ask, what kind of relationship do we have with the Quran and the Deen? What relationship do we have with the Majlis of Ahlul Bayt? Why do we come here to begin with? Is it out of habit? Ada? Or is it to seek some kind of reflection, knowledge, to be spiritually renewed, to do tajdeed of our Islam, to renew our Islam? Or are we looking for the most entertaining speaker? Are we looking for someone who will entertain me and make me laugh and so on and so forth for an hour? As Sheikh Saduq says, the one who listens to a speaker because of the speaker has committed shirk. Saduq, rahmatullah alayh. The member is not a clown pulpit, as it's unfortunately become in some parts of North America and Europe. It's a place where we renew our Islam. And the people that we invite and call to our centers should inshallah have those qualifications in order to impart those admonitions and for us to take advantage of those admonitions. It doesn't necessarily depend as to how entertaining the person is. It's not among the criteria of Ahlul Bayt. It's not. Because if we truly want to learn, I'll tell you honestly, if we truly want to learn, and we are truly motivated to take a lesson, we won't look for the most entertaining person. And if the person is entertaining, then fine. But that won't be the first standard. Unfortunately, I see some communities, and Samat Sayyid Radawi, in his lecture very recently, Samahat al-Sayyid, he in Toronto gave a very profound lecture about this, and he said that in fact the pulpit has become, these are his words, not mine. Samahat al-Sayyid, may Allah give him a long life, great alim. He said the pulpit has become a celebrity cult. His words, not mine. He's a great scholar. Meaning people are not looking for ibrah. They just want to get a tickle and a laugh and go home. Or they just want to make someone just to come and make them cry and go home. They don't necessarily want to reflect. They want to feel good while they're sitting there. They want to feel like, oh, I didn't even feel the time go by. It just went by. He was so good. But what did you take from it? Did it change your life? That's another issue. What were the qualifications of the speaker? That's another issue. All of these things need to be taken into account before establishing a majlis. Sallu ala Muhammad wa
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
And one of the most important components of taking lessons, of taking admonition from something, is muhasabatun nafs, is self-accountability. Look at this hadith from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, who says, لَيْسَ مِنَّا مَنْ لَمْ يُحَاسِبْ نَفْسَهُ فِي كُلِّ يَوْمٍ. That this person is not a Shia, لَيْسَ مِنَّا, he's not from amongst us, the one who does not evaluate himself every single day. لَيْسَ مِنَّا, not even a Shia, that they could do azadari, ziyarat, marthiyah, they could walk to Karbala. But without muhasabatun nafs, self-accountability, self-evaluation, laysa minna. They're not from amongst us. فَإِنْ عَمِلَ خَيْرًا حَسَنًا, and if he does a good deed, this is how you do muhasabah. That at the end of every day, or at the beginning of every day, considering the next day, preferably at the end of every day, we ask ourselves, the Imam then, فَإِنْ عَمِلَ خَيْرًا حَسَنًا, that if he has done a good deed, or إِنْ عَمِلَ حَسَنًا, that if he has done or she has performed a good deed, استزاد الله منه وحمد الله عليه, that he or she asks Allah for the opportunity to do more hasanat, and he or she praises Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving him or her the opportunity to do something good. Why? Because God says, وَمَا أَصَابَكَ مِنْ حَسَنَةٍ فَمِنَ اللَّهِ. Allah says in Surah Al-Imran that whatever goodness happens to you, whatever goodness you do in your life, it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not us that did it. Even our prayer is God's. Right? Alhamdulillah alladhi da'awtani ilayh wa dalaltani alayh. That Imam Zain al-Abidin says, all praise is due to the one who called me to him and guided me to him so that I make dua to him. that my dua is not my dua, it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's. Because He has given me the tawfiq and the benefit to do it. He's given me the fursa and the opportunity to do it. That I have no right to think that my charity, my prayer, my siyam, birrul walidain, my love and respect and obedience to my parents is mine. Rather we shall say, or rather we shall do, istazad Allah minhu. That this person will ask Allah for the opportunity to do this more. Wa hamidallah alayh. And praises Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the ability to perform this act. وَإِنْ عَمِلَ شَرًّا. But if this person commits an act of evil, a sin, let us say do not watch their hijab, they do not wake up for their prayer, or anything else, وَمَا شَابَهَ ذَلِكَ. If they perform a sin, استغفر الله منه. That this person seeks forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala right away. In that day. They don't let days go by. Because the problem with that is the heart becomes hard. And when we let day, yawm ba'da yawm ba'da yawm, becomes a problem. Day after day after day, the qalb becomes hard like a rock in hijr. Right? As Imam al-Hussein says. And when the heart becomes hard, the Imam of the time himself could come and speak, and the person would not change. Right? And that's why Imam al-Hussein said, مُلِيَتْ بَطُونَهُمْ بِالْحَرَامِ وَاسْتَوْحَدَ عَلَيْهِمْ الشَّيْطَانِ وَقَدْ قَسَّتْ قَلُوبَهُمْ أَقْصَى مِنَ الْهِجْرِ. Right? As Imam al-Hussein says, that their tummies have been filled with haram, meaning haram income. And because of that, shaitan has possessed them, has become their companion. And thus their hearts have become hard, harder than a rock. And thus no matter what I now tell them on the day of Ashura, they won't listen. They will take my head. They will take the veils of my women. Why? Because no muhasabah. Day by day by day went without them reflecting upon themselves as to why it is that they are doing what they are doing. And when this happens, the person is in big trouble. I'm not kidding. This is really serious, because what happens is, for example, let us say we come for the 10 days of Muharram, maybe 3 days of Arbaeen. And then we don't do any muhasabah for the rest of the year. We don't think about our soul. We don't ponder over ourselves for the rest of the year. We're not going to change. Nothing's going to happen. It just doesn't work that way, because Ahl Bayt said, لَيْسَ مِنَّا مَنْ لَمْ يُحَاسِبْ نَفْسَهُ فِي كُلِّ يَوْمٍ. That the one who does not evaluate themselves every single day is not amongst us. He's not a Shia. That's a profound statement. Laysa minna. Right? And Sahib al-Wasail, Al-Khur al-Amili has an entire bab known as Wujub Muhasabat al-Nafs. Fi kulli yawm. There's an entire chapter in Wasail al-Shia on the incumbency and the obligatoriness of self-evaluation every single day. It's not a matter of an option. Our entire salvation, the light of our souls, depends upon it. Without it, these majalis will not have an effect. They won't. And that's why sometimes in some of our communities we find we're in the same place every year. The same questions, the same sins, the same shak, after the questions have already been answered. Why? Why is it? We have to ask. I'm not going to answer the question. I want us all to think about it. Why is it that every year, I don't know about this community, but some communities, every year it's the same problems? Is music haram? Same thing. And we keep going over and over these basic issues which we should have blown by a long time ago. Because the Shia are those who take ihtiyat and wara, precaution in their matters of religion. They're not those who are always looking for a loophole. That we should have moved past these things. And the reason why we always come back to square one, some communities, I don't know this community, some communities, is because nothing happens for the rest of the year. And thus whatever was gained in those nights is gone because there was no self-evaluation. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
After muhasabah comes muraqabah. Step 2. Which means the path of self-censorship. That after I contemplate to myself, I think about what good have I done, what evil have I done. What am I going to do with the thinking? I have to go a step further. And that's muraqabah. Which literally means, as Abdullah Mamaqani tells his son in his book, Mir'atul Rashad. It's a very, very beautiful book by Sheikh Abdullah al-Mamaqani, rahmatullahi alayhi. He writes in his book, he says, Ya Bunayya. It was a whole book which he wrote before his death to his son. To read every month. And he says, if you do not read it every month, you are aq. Imagine. It's a book on spirituality, on the suluk to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Beautiful, beautiful book. In every chapter begins with Ya Bunayya. And he continues. Abdullah Mamaqani. Sheikh Abdullah al-Mamaqani. Mir'atul Rashad. It's a beautiful, beautiful gem of a book, really. It makes you cry when you read it. He says, Ya Bunayya, my son, take your soul and surrender it to Allah's supervision. Raqabta Allah. And surrender it to the fact that God sees you. And when you do this, my son, you shall not commit ma'asiyah. Why? Because inna Allah kana alaykum raqiban. That verse in Surah An-Nisa is haq and true. That God is ever watching. That He says, oh my son, if you choose the path of faith, you must accept and dispose yourself to the fact that annahu yarak, that He sees you. And if He sees you, your haya will compel you to not commit ma'asiyah. That if you know that God sees you, inna Allah kana alaykum raqiba. If you know this, then you would have some sense of shame and self-dignity to not continually commit sin. But when we do not do muraqabah, when we do not do self-censorship, and we are not aware that God is watching us, we don't have haya. Meaning we don't have the shame and self-decency to watch ourselves in front of God in the same way we would watch ourselves in front of akhareen, others. Haya means the ability to have a shyness in front of Allah such that one would not dare to shame themselves in front of God. But let's go a little bit further here. Amir al-Mu'mineen has said, is a beautiful riwayah in Al-Kafi, where he says, أفضل العبادة العفاف. This word is very important to understand its meaning. أفضل العبادة العفاف, meaning the best worship is spiritual chastity. Afaf comes from the same word which is related to being afif. Or when you look for a wife, you look for someone that is afifa. It's the same word. You can go to all the books, the ahadith, the qamus, the dictionary. This is what it will tell you. The meaning is كف النفس عن المحرمات وعن سؤال الناس. That the person avoids committing sin and avoids asking people for their needs. And when they do that, they have not committed spiritual fornication in front of God. That they are spiritually chaste and pure. In the same way they would look for a spouse that is pure, that has cleaned them, that has kept themselves clean before marriage. Amir al-Mu'mineen is saying that the best of ibadah, that the most virtuous form of worship, is keeping our soul clean and chaste. From what? From sin and from turning in for our needs to the people before Allah. This is what it means. To come back to that question, what is the meaning? That so God exists, so now what? Here we are. Because God exists, we know He loves us. Because He loves us, we must turn to our lover. We must beseech our lover, not beseech the people. And that is what Amir al-Mu'mineen is saying. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
We must come to the conclusion, as God tells us in Surah 35, يا أيها الناس أنتم الفقراء إلى الله. That, O mankind, you are all in a state of poverty before God. Wallahu huwa al-Ghani al-Hamid. And Allah is the one that needs nothing and is worthy of all praise. That we are all fuqara bayna yaday Allah. That we are all in a state of poverty in front of God. Because we owe our existence to Him. Remember, we come back to the first verse where God says, did a time come where you were not something worthy of being mentioned, or mankind was not something worthy of being mentioned? لَمْ يَكُنْ شَيْئًا مَذْكُورًا. That do we remember this? That we owe everything to God. Everything. And if we remember this, then we will realize that we are faqir. And when we realize that we are faqir, we have haya. We have a sense of shame from sinning. We have a sense of consciousness that God is watching. Because we know we owe our existence to Him. But the problem is if the beginning is problematic for us, if that is not haq, it is not deeply rooted in our souls, then what follows from it will not follow correctly. If the first premise is not solid. Are you following me? Of how things move in logical sequence. Let us go to Dua Talab al-Hawa'ij. Man Talab al-Hawa'ij. Beautiful dua in Sahih Sajadiyah about for the person who has needs, who wants to ask Allah for something. How do they ask? Look at this. He says, I won't have time to go through all the Arabic because not everyone here understands Arabic, so it's, we won't go through all that. But the Imam says, so he who strives to fix his deficiency through you and by you, he desires to rid himself of poverty. That the one who seeks to fix whatever is wrong with them, through you and by you, Allah, that this is the person who desires to rid himself of poverty. So he has sought his need in the most likely place and has made his request from the correct quarter. وَمَنْ تَوَجَّهَ بِحَاجَتِهِ إِلَىٰ أَحَدٍ مِّنْ خَلْقِهِ. And the one who turns in need to any one among your creatures. أو جعله سببا نجحها دونك. Or he makes that person the cause of his needs being granted. That he believes, even for a moment, that it was the doctor that cured me. It's because the doctor gave me that prescription. He is the sabab. That the person who does this, فَقَدْ تَعَرَّضَ لِلْحِرْمَانِ وَإِسْتَحَقَّ مِنْ عِنْدِكَ فَوْتَ الْإِحْسَانِ. That this person has exposed himself to deprivation and he deserves to lose your ihsan. that he deserves to lose your grace and your love and your beneficence. Because he has put a cause to someone other than you. And thus, he has not been afif. He's not chaste. He's not had haya in front of Allah. He's polluted his soul through spiritual unchastity, spiritual fornication. And this is one of the greatest forms of disobedience. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Imam al-Hussein in Dua Arafah again says so beautifully, he says, Ummiyat aynu la taraka alayha raqiba. Blind is the eye which does not see you watching over it. Blind is the eye. Blind. And people will ask God on the Day of Judgment, لما حشرتني أعمى وقد كنت بصيرا. And people will ask God on the Day of Judgment, why have you raised me blind when I could see in this world? Because all I could see was everything but God. I did no muraqabah. And thus I am raised blind as a bat on the Day of Judgment. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
As the Prophet says, without haya, Islam is uryan. That without haya, Islam is exposed, nude. So we have to ask, is our soul exposed or does it have haya? This is a very important question and will determine our spiritual salvation, will determine whether we are able to be successful in our ibadat, our mu'amalat, our seeking of knowledge, our spirituality, everything. And that's why muhasabah, the process of self-accountability, self-evaluation is so vitally important. Look at what Imam Zain al-Abidin says in Dua Abi Hamza Thamari. The fourth Imam says, and this is most likely to teach others. He says, لم أستحيق في الخلاء ولم أراقبك في الملاء. That I did not show shame or self-dignity before you when I was in private, nor did I take heed of your presence when I was in public. That I thought I could commit the sins that I commit because I'm in private. But then it got worse. That now even I'm in public and I still commit sin because I had no awareness that you are watching me. SubhanAllah. This is again why muhasabah is so important. This is why التفكر في الساعة أفضل من عبادة السنة. Right? That contemplation of an hour is better than worship of a year. I'm not talking about sitting and doing meditation. What about thinking about our soul? Writing down our deeds. Every day. This is what Abdullah al-Mamakhani tells his son as well. To write down every single day the deeds that I've performed in a day. The thoughts that I've had in my mind. And how much of that is pleasure, is seeking the pleasure of Allah? And how much of that is sinful or inappropriate? And if I do that every single day, and then I return to the same list every single day, I'll begin the process of self-renewal. This is how the ulama have advised the students and their children. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And this is precisely how Hur came to save himself from fire when he said, Inni ukhayyiru nafsi baina al-jannah wal-nar. That moment of self-accountability, of self-evaluation, and of muraqabah, of awareness that Allah is watching, is what allowed him to choose Jannah over Nar, paradise over hell. It's that moment. And that one moment was better than the entire worship of his entire life. Because he saved himself in that moment. And that's what it takes. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And how do we do tafakkur? We can ask ourselves these questions. Again, I've not made up these questions. These are the questions of the scholars. We ask ourselves, where have I come from and where am I going? What have I done and have I prepared for my rihla, for my journey to God? Every day. Have I thought about the fact that what will I do when I'm transferred from cotton sheets to the dirt in the ground? What will my soul do when this cheek that is so comfortable on that pillow at night will be hitting the turab? What will I do? How will I part with my ayal and my amwal? How will I part with my family and my wealth? What will I do? Am I ready or not? Do they own me or do I own them? We have to ask. Abdullah Malkhani has given all these beautiful questions to his son. And he said he wants his son every day to ask himself these questions. Every single day. Am I ready to part with my wealth or not? You know, I'll give you an example. I recently met a great Sayyid. He's about 90 years old, one of the final students of Sayyid al-Khoy, and the last student of Agha Bazook Tahrani. I met him recently. We're doing some mubahatha together. And he said, the first thing he said to me when I came in the room, he says, I have something for you. I said, SubhanAllah, what is it? He pulls out a book. He puts it in my hand. And he says, I want you to use this for your research. The book is 1,000 years old. Kitab al-Mazar. From the year 500 of Hijrah. And he says, this is a light of my heart, my life. I have prayed with this book everywhere that I've gone, from Najaf to Karbala to Qom. Now I am parting with it. Probably it was one of the most important things in his life. And he let go. Why? Because he realized it's not about him. It's about furthering the deen. And when it becomes about the deen and not about us, that's when we know we are beginning to prepare to travel to God. That's the question. And great scholars, like this gentleman, he remains unnamed, anonymous, we shall leave him in this way, the Sayyid, can part with something like this in that way. Because they know that the interests of the deen and the madhab of Ahlul Bayt comes before whatever personal possessions they may have. Let us go back to Dua bi Hamza Thumani again. What does the Imam say? In ana nuqiltu ala mithli hali ila qabri, that if I am transferred in the way I am to my grave, lam umahidhu li raqdati, that I have not facilitated my way to arrive there. That if I am taken now to my grave, I have not paved the way yet. وَلَمْ أَفْرُشْهُ بِالْعَمَلِ صَالِحٍ. And I have not furnished it with good deeds. لِدَجْعَتِي وَمَالِي. Due to my laziness and my wealth. That because of these things I have not prepared. Meaning my soul is so full of concerns for everything other than Allah. My kids, my wife, or for a wife, her husband. Everything, that I want to please everyone. So I may not be a selfish person, but I want to please everyone. But I do not put the rida of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the center of the equation. So if my son or daughter wants to have a wedding with music, I will allow it because I love him, na'udhu billah. Or with inappropriate interaction, ikhtilat, things which are against the sharia, I will do it because I love him. I still remember, I met a brother not long ago, a couple of years ago, so I told him that, your wedding is coming up. I would love to attend. He's a good brother of mine in the community. And he says, but I want to let you know there will be a dance. I said, really? I said, why? I said, you brought up your whole life. You know this is not in the realm of Islamic morality. You know this. I said, your parents are, mashallah, among the mutadayyaneen. We know this. He told me, but I love her. It's her only day. And likewise, and vice versa for the girl, for the boy. Why? Because Allah is nowhere. With the rida of Allah, the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the imam of the time, fall out the window. And I got so upset at him. I said, I've known you for so many years, and I must say I'm disappointed in you today. And I didn't attend. Of course. And he didn't care. His own family didn't attend. His uncles. Sahib, of course, where are they going to come to a place like that? It's shameful. Mu'min would not find themselves in a place like that. He didn't care. He said, no. So one day, that's it. And that is the example of spiritual zina. And sometimes we do it for our kids. We do it for our spouses. We know it's wrong. And that is the greatest spiritual depravity and najasa, impurity, which comes upon the soul, and then it's hard to remove that again. Because it leaves a stain. And when that stain is there, nukta sawda, when that black dot travels and gets deep into the heart, it is hard to turn back. And look at what Imam Zain al-Abidin, he says, وَلَا أَبْكِي وَلَا أَدْرِي إِلَى مَا يَكُونُ مَصِيرِي. And despite all this, I don't cry at the fact that I don't know where I will end up. Yet I don't cry. What is wrong with me? I don't know what my destination will be, yet I don't cry. وَأَرَى نَفْسِي تُخَادِعُنِي وَأَيَامِي تُخَاتِلُنِي. And I see myself deceiving me, and I know I am only fooling myself, and the days of my life are betraying and cheating me. And I know this. وَلَا أَبْكِي وَلَا أَبْكِي مَا يَكُونُ مَصِيرِي. I don't even know where I'm going, and I don't cry. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Brothers, we have to wake up from spiritual slumber. We have to. We have no choice. We love Ahlul Bayt. That's why we're here. That's why we have driven all this way. And inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give us all the tawfiq to leave here And whatever it is that we need to change, we get down to ourselves first before we point fingers at others. Myself at the beginning. And it is so appropriate to talk about the day in which we saw how vast the chest of Abu Abdullah was. That there was a man who had a crisis of conscience. The very man that was responsible for halting the caravan of Imam al-Hussein. The very man that was responsible for blocking Imam al-Hussein from the water. Yet when he heard the call of Abu Abdullah, أَمَّا مِن مُغِيثٍ يُغِيثُنَا لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ, that when he heard the call of Abu Abdullah, is there anyone to come to our aid for the sake of Allah? أَمَّا مِن ذَابٍ يَذَبُّ عَنْ حَرَمِ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ, is there anyone to come to defend the household of the Prophet? That when Hur heard this, he approached Umar ibn Sa'ad and he said, are you really going to kill them? I think when we look at the history, Hur didn't think that it would ever get to the point where, as we say, As-salamu ala man hura fil wara. As we say in the ziyarah, that salam on the one that is slaughtered in public. That Hur never thought, I don't think that Hur really thought that Umar ibn Sa'ad was going to go through right to the end, meaning to take the head of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Umar ibn Sa'ad told him that surely the battle goes well and the result shall be the cutting of ru'us, of heads. Hur found himself in a major predicament. And he says, Inni ukhayyiru nafsi bayna al-jannah wal-nar. And now I am going to choose between heaven and hell. That one moment, that moment of self-reflection, that moment of muhasabah, changed his entire destiny, his entire future. And then he says, فَوَاللَّهِ لَا أَخْتَارُ عَلَى الْجَنَّةِ شَيْئًا لَوْ قُطِعَتْ أُحْرِقَتْ. He said, nothing can be chosen over Jannah, even if I be cut into pieces or burnt. Then he took his horse, قَاصِدًا al-Hussein. He took his horse and he began to ride to Imam Hussein. وَيَدُهُ عَلَى رَأْسِهِ, and his hand was on his head. He said, Allahumma inni tibtu ilayk fatub alayh. He says, oh Allah, I do repentance to you, so turn to me. He says, فَقَدْ أَرْعَبْتُمْ قُلُوبَ أَوْلِيَائِكَ وَأَوْلَادْ بِنْتَ نَبِيِّكَ. Because I have struck fear into the hearts of your beloved, in the hearts of the children of the daughter of your Prophet. Subhanallah, he reaches Abu Abdullah. He turns to Imam al-Hussein and he says, may I be sacrificed for you. I am the one who did not allow you to return to Medina. He turns to him and he says, أنا طائب إلى الله هل ترى لي من توبة. He says, do you accept my tawbah? Imagine the maqam of Imam al-Hussein. He knew that his tawbah to Allah would not be accepted without Imam al-Hussein accepting it. فقال الحسين نعم يتوب الله عليك. Allah has accepted your repentance. Hur goes out to fight. ثم استشهد فحمل إلى الحسين. He was eventually martyred and carried back to Imam al-Hussein. And Imam al-Hussein took the turab from his face. And he said, أنت الحر كما سمتك أمك. He said that you are free just as your mother named you free. في الدنيا والآخرة. However, brothers and sisters, a muraqabah of Imam al-Hussein would not end. This was a man who could not be shook. On the day of Ashura, it is told to us, look at the cognizance that Imam al-Hussein had of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That on the day of Ashura, Tabari relates a riwayah from Umar ibn Sa'ad, who says, Wallahi ma ra'aytu rajulan makthura. He says that we have not seen a man that is about to break from the pressure. قَدْ قُتِلَ وُلْدُهُ وَأَهْلَ بَيْتِهِ وَأَصْحَابِهِ. Because his children have been killed, his family has been killed, and his ashab have been killed. Yet he stands there fearless, fighting min al-yamin al-shimal. From the right to the left, he continued to fight so valiantly. After having 72 wounds inflicted on his body, it is stated, فَوَقِفَ يَسْتَرِي سَاعَةً فَكَدَعَفَ عَنِ الْقِتَالِ, that he was weakened from the fighting and he began stopped. وَإِذَا أَطَاهُ هِجَرٌ فَوَقَعَ عَلَى جَبْهَتِهِ, and they began to throw stone upon his face. And he took his cloth and he began to wipe the blood from his face. And then they threw an arrow, and the arrow entered his heart. فَوَقَعَ عَلَى قَلْبِهِ. And look at what the Imam says. This is my point, brothers. Look at what he says. Bismillah wa billah wa ala millati Rasulillah. Look at that muraqabah. That he knew Allah was watching him at the moment when those arrows began to enter his body. The moment they began to stone his holy face, he knew that Allah was watching him when he said, Bismillah wa billah wa ala millati Rasulillah. Thumma rafa'a ra'sahu ila sama. And then he lifts his head to the heavens and he says, قال إلهي أنت تعلم أنهم يقتلون رجلا ليس على وجه الأرض ابن بنت نبي غيره. That, oh Allah, you know that they are killing a man upon whom there is no more son of the daughter of Rasulullah left in the earth. Imagine, this is the ma'rifah that Imam al-Hussein had of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. His face is covered in blood. His body is covered in wounds. And he remembers Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He does munajat to Allah. He lifts his hands. He makes dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then وَخَدِبَ بِهِمَ رَأْسُهُ وَلَحْيَتُهُ هُوَ يَقُولُ. And then the blood is squirting out from his neck and from all parts of his body. And he begins to soak his head and his beard in this blood. And he says, ألقى الله مخدبا بدمي مغصوبا على حقي. And he said, I shall meet my Lord covered in my blood and usurped of my right. ألا لعنة الله على قوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. Martin Hussein.